1988's wildfires burned more than 1.5 million acres in and around Yellowstone National Park. What went wrong? Why were the most experienced and best organized firefighters in the world continually frustrated in their efforts to control these fires? The answer involves a freak combination of factors, starting more than a century ago. When European man moved into the Yellowstone area in the late 1800s, wildfires were no longer allowed free rein in the forests. This short-circuited a natural system. It's really much safer to let natural fires periodically remove accumulations of fuel, like pine needles, branches, and downed trees. And that's what the park's policy is today. But nearly a century of fire suppression allowed fuels to build up in large areas of the park. Adding to the fuel accumulation are the millions of dead trees left from an insect infestation in the early 1980s. This fuel, some still standing, some lying on the ground in thick patches like jackstraws, is a perfect bed for fire because of its age. All the tiny branches are still intact. This perfect kindling is eager to catch a spark or burst into flame just from the radiated heat of another nearby tree burning. Weather is next, contributing to the disaster in several ways. After a few dry years in a row, 1988 is a drought worse than Yellowstone has ever seen in its 120-year recorded history. Fuel moistures of 2% have been measured here, significantly drier than kiln-dried lumber, and horribly drier than the usual danger limit of 15%. Even autumn's cold nights haven't brought their usual relief. There's been no dew point, so fuels don't recover any moisture at night, something firefighters have always been able to count on to help. We're left with unprecedented nighttime fire behavior to add to the other troubles. The weather also brought high winds, gusts of 50 to 70 miles per hour, and days of 40-mile-per-hour steady winds. And those winds are a killer. They move the fire very rapidly, and worse, they blow embers ahead of the fire, as much as a mile ahead of the fire, where they land and start new fires. Under most conditions, about 20% of these sparks or firebrands will start new fires, called spot fires. In Yellowstone, thanks to low fuel moistures, and the fact that most timber is lodgepole pine, whose bark makes the very best heat-retaining embers, that 20% rate increased to 80%.
What's happened off of this fire is that we have a sequence of spot fires quarter to a half a mile out. We have some crews laying hose out there. We have some hand crews that are out there, and they've already stabilized those fires, and now we need to go out and put them out so that we don't have this situation go on and on. And this has been the scenario all throughout the park, is that the fires will begin to get a handle on them. They'll spot a quarter mile out, they'll grow, they'll become part of the fire, then they spot again and just keep moving and moving and moving.
Spotting on this scale can trap and kill firefighters, or at best chase them off the fire line. Finding and trying to control these spots before they get out of hand also takes resources away from the main fire and exhausts crews. Extensive spotting also makes fire line worthless. Whether narrow hand-built line or wide dozer line, or natural fire breaks like rivers and Madison Canyon, these fires were able to literally blow over anything. The wind also changed direction every time another dry cold front came through. The front would arrive, the wind would shift and blow harder, pushing the fire over the lines in long fingers and spots. Then, as the fronts left and winds returned to their normal direction, the long fingers of fire advance would be blown sideways, increasing the size of the fire's flame front tremendously. Fighting this kind of fire is challenging, hard work, and dangerous. You cannot put people in front of a fast-moving, spotting fire. They could too easily be trapped. So you try to put them on the flanks where they can work to cut fire line against a creeping ground fire. That didn't work well in Yellowstone. The wind shifts repeatedly blew fires over good line. Exhausted crews complained bitterly of being 3 for 18, building good line 18 days in a row and having it hold only 3 times. The terrain worked against the crews in the Yellowstone area too. It's extremely steep and rocky. And adding further to the normal firefighters' burdens of steep ground, heat, smoke, dust, and long hours are the snags. Mostly from the bug kill in the early 1980s, they're everywhere in the park. Those picturesque dead trees with their roots rotted away, so a little fire or wind or a bump from a shovel can knock them over. And they can fall without a sound. Even snags with good roots are a hazard. They'll burn through quickly at the base and fall. As a safeguard, crews post a lookout nearby to watch and warn of snags and rocks.
Coming down.
These conditions, the snags, rocks, terrain, and unprecedented nighttime fire behavior, forced most crews to work only day shifts on these fires. Although frequent emergency efforts kept some of those day shifts on the fire lines until midnight or 2 a.m. or later. Sometimes morning temperature inversions held thick smoke at ground level until mid or late afternoon. Inversions slow the fires somewhat, but they also hide the fire. They stop all airborne firefighting, and they eliminate airlifts of crews and supplies. These difficulties weighed heavily at one point in a decision to remove crews from a portion of the fire line near Old Faithful. North Fork Incident Commander Denny Bungars talks about his rationale for that decision.
The decision to redeploy these troops was based on the priorities that the park had given us, the priorities to protect life and property. Old Faithful obviously is one, and West Yellowstone is the other, the two major areas that we need to protect here. A couple of things happened that also prompted my decision. One was that we had a great deal of inversion. There were a couple of days where we were unable to get food and water to those people. They were living on what they'd gotten the day before. Because this is bear country, we couldn't leave stores out there for them to go back to if we couldn't get in. So there was 2 days where they weren't fed and didn't have water. And that certainly added to my decision to move them out of this area. The other was that they had been out there a number of days. 2 crews, or 4 crews actually, had been on fire somewhere for the last 30 days. And it was time to get them back home and get them rejuvenated.
In August, the U.S. Army showed up to help. More than 2,000 troops from Fort Lewis, Washington. Hastily trained in safety and basic techniques of firefighting, these men and women polished their skills on the job. Barry Hotel, a fire captain from the California Department of Forestry, brought this crew of 11th Artillery soldiers up from mop-up crew to real firefighters.
Now we're more or less veterans. These people have worked from almost a Class 2 hand crew to a Class 1, which is used strictly for hot lines. Class 2 are normally used only on mop-up work. These folks have been working right up against some hotter line. In fact, yesterday we got burnt out of a line, and so they have had a taste of fire and growing in to be quite good firemen. I'll take these folks anywhere, fight fire with them.
In September, the Marine Corps supplied people and equipment to replace Army resources being rotated home. Another common and usually effective firefighting technique is to build fire line well away from the fire. Then burn out the fuel between your line and the approaching flame front. Of course, a lot must be considered before starting this tactic. Conditions must favor the burnout behaving as predicted. Changing winds can turn a solution into a problem very quickly. Crews stand by when burning out an area to make sure their fire line holds and to watch for spot fires. On August 25th, a perfectly executed burnout was a major part of the effort to protect Canyon Village from a fast advancing fire. Other measures included fuel reduction surrounding the village, rooftop sprinklers, and plenty of fire crews hosing things down to prevent spot fires. But thanks to the burnout, the other measures were not put to the hard test of trying to stop a charging wall of flame. Unfortunately, the weather reduced some burnouts to temporary victories. Winds pushed the main fires around or over many well-executed efforts. Dozers are another excellent firefighting tool. As long as the terrain isn't too steep, they can build fire line wider and a whale of a lot faster than the best of hand crews can. They were used in the park, but their application was limited. The plain fact is that given such extreme fuel and weather conditions, dozer line is no better than hand line. With spot fires starting a quarter, a half, or more than a mile ahead of the main fires, any fire line becomes useless. If dozers had been used indiscriminately in the park, the fire's final sizes would be no different, and the park would be crisscrossed with deep, long-lasting burned-over scars. Dozers were widely used at park boundaries, but the shifting winds frequently rendered their work useless. Like on September 2nd and 3rd, when the Targhee National Forest picked up a 15,000-acre slopover from the western edge of the North Fork fire. A slopover that crossed Dozer Line like nothing.
Letting it down around.
That wind shift moved quite a few people out of their summer homes and campgrounds in eastern Idaho.
There's a deputy sheriff came by this morning, I think around noon. Said you got about an hour to pack up and go. Wow. So we started then, but then others came around and said, well, it's about there or about here, so we gauged it and stuck around and kept felling trees and packing and felling another tree and packing and so on. You know, it's been here 40 years or so. My wife's grandparents built it. So it's kind of sad. We sure love it up there.
To cool hot spots and slow the fire enough so that crews can attack it, airdrops of water or retardant are used a lot. It is not possible to put out a big fire with these, but you can retard portions of it enough for crews to come in and do the real work of building line and mopping up. The retardant bombers used included these Army National Guard C-130 cargo planes, fitted with modular airborne firefighting systems. They can blast their 3,000 gallons out two big nozzles in just a few seconds using compressed air. Helicopters, too, can be a tremendous help to firefighters. This medium-sized ship can drop 250 gallons of water with excellent accuracy. The twin-rotor Boeing Vertol was very heavily used on the Yellowstone fires, lifting as much as 1,000 gallons at a time if the water source is deep enough to fill the big bucket. These aircraft chased spot fires, helped save structures, cooled and slowed advancing fire fronts, and assisted ground crews with mop-up work. Their water sources varied from site to site, with streams, rivers, ponds, lakes, and hastily placed portable tanks, all serving at one time or another. Besides the spectacular water drops, some of more than 2,000 gallons at a time, helicopters are ideal for hauling firefighters and their food and equipment to the often roadless and inaccessible places the fires were burning. Probably the best pack mule of them all is the Army's CH-47 Chinook. As many as 11 of the big twin-rotor, twin-engine, multi-purpose ships were based at West Yellowstone Airport, working wherever they were needed. In a typical mission, one could move 30-plus firefighters and a mountain of equipment from one remote area to another in a matter of minutes. Teaming aircraft up with high-tech firefighting gave the fastest fire line construction of all. First, you hike or parachute in a crew of experts, then drop supplies from an airplane or bring them in on helicopters, whatever's available. Your crew of experts unrolls a long, continuous line of fire line explosive, 100 or 1,000 or 25,000 feet of it. The terrain and your need for speed will help you decide. The crew tapes together the ends of each roll of explosive. Then, with appropriate safety procedures, someone attaches an electric blasting cap to one end of the explosive. Connect a battery, push a button, and you just built some first-class fire line. For places where flames are threatening structures, engines and foam trucks are used. Foam trucks are especially valuable. Using a highly concentrated version of your favorite liquid dishwashing detergent, they blast a layer of suds onto a fire or onto buildings, a layer which sticks better and lasts longer than an equal amount of plain water. On Wednesday, September 7th, foam and water played a crucial role in defending buildings around Old Faithful. The day before, high winds had driven a long, narrow finger out of the southeast corner of the main North Fork fire. Several miles long, it pointed directly at the settlement around the world-famous geyser. Firefighters were ready. They had been working hard for 3 days to put in place a very well-thought-out plan to defend against the flames. A wide fire break was cleared at the edge of the settlement nearest the fire, and a sprinkler system installed to wet it. Scattered fuels were removed from around dwellings, storage buildings, and power facilities. Assignments were made, priorities set. Helicopters worked hard through most of Tuesday and Wednesday to slow the fire's advance, but the wind could not be denied. For a while Wednesday afternoon, it looked as though the wind's direction and a high ridge immediately behind the settled area would combine to lead the fire safely to the south of and around the Old Faithful area. Retardant drops were ordered to encourage this direction of movement and limit the fire's advance over the ridge. Crews and sprinklers sprayed water and foam on everything burnable, especially people's homes. Winds continued to strengthen and the fire's run accelerated, behind the ridge still, but crossing the road to the south of the settlement. Some crews were removed from the south end of the defense line as the flames raced across the highway as though it didn't exist. Then the wind changed. Blowing at a measured 50 miles per hour and gusting to a reported 80 miles per hour, it pushed the long, hot fire front directly at and over the last ridge. The order was given for the planned withdrawal to the Old Faithful Lodge area.
Old Faithful Lodge. A lot of through it and small right back on these cabins. You got anybody else back there with you? At the big parking lot?
Those who left at the foot of the firestorm will never forget the day. Planning and providence combined to allow everyone there to escape safely.
Thanks, guys. Good luck.
As the fire then threw embers, heat, and choking smoke on and over the lodge area, efforts to find and put out spot fires went into high gear. Pre-placed engines and crews did their best. Incredibly, few buildings were lost, and those which burned were not among the high-priority structures in the settlement. Flames from burning buildings were prevented in most cases from spreading. At the same time the Old Faithful settlement was so busy, Canyon Village, Cook City, and Silvergate were fighting to survive. But at least for that day, losses were relatively minor. It was depressing watching the acreage of these fires exceed half of the land area of Yellowstone National Park, but that statistic is misleading. Even intense fires like these do not consume everything within their final boundaries. More than half of the fire's area is either untouched or only carried a creeping ground fire which doesn't hurt anything. Also, the patterns of really complete burning are irregular within the fires, which gives a patchwork or mosaic effect to the landscape. The green areas are future sources of native seed to reforest the parts where trees were killed, and they offer superb refuges for wildlife. That wildlife, by the way, is not as bad off as most people assume. Usually, the larger animals are only temporarily affected by wildfires. The fires progress slowly enough most of the time that healthy animals have little trouble staying out of the way. They'll even return to burned areas very soon after the main fire passes, to live in the unburned forest and meadow that remain. A severe winter would have much more of an effect on wildlife populations than these fires, and over the long run, almost all species will actually benefit from the effects of the flames. New meadows will be created. Some areas which were overcrowded with lodgepole pine will turn to brush or aspen groves, and the patchy nature of the new growth will provide a tremendous amount of ideal wildlife habitat. There will be plenty of the popular bison, elk, deer, and moose for people to see when they visit the park in the future. And the park has a rich future. The natural regeneration of the forest will offer a beautiful lesson in nature's workings for years to come.